close the roll, tally the vote, ayes 70, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 16, AB 627. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 627 by Assemblymember Gomez and others, enacting to pharmacy benefit managers.
Mr. Gomez, you may open.
Mr. Speaker and members, AB 627 is back in the Assembly for concurrence. The amendments clarify that this bill does not apply to pharmacy benefit manager contract standards for pharmacy networks set by the Division of Workers' Compensation. This is consistent with the intent of the legislation. AB 627 has received bipartisan support in both houses, and there is no opposition to this bill. I thank you and ask for your concurrence of the Senate amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 75, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 17, AB 638. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 638 by Assemblymember Frazier, enacting to vessels.
Mr. Frazier, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 638 extends the current requirement that children under the age of 13 wear life jackets while a vessel is underway to certain vessels that are longer than 26 feet in length. I respectfully ask for your aye vote on concurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 71, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 18, AB 661. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 661 by Assemblymember Mathis, enacting to local government.
Mr. Mathis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 661 has returned to the Assembly floor after passing off the Senate floor with no opposition. AB 661 clarifies the statutory framework and current law regarding real estate fraud prevention and enforcement fees that continues may place on record real estate documents. The amendments taken in the Senate address the concerns by the California Association of Realtors. There is no opposition. I ask for your aye votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mathis. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 78, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 19, AB 822. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 822 by Assemblymember Cooley, enacting to insurance.
Mr. Cooley, you may open.
Good morning, colleagues. I rise today to bring to you AB 822 on concurrence relating to the California Insurance Guarantee Association. It is a characteristic of insurance that people pay money today for a promise to be performed in the future. To protect the ability of that promise to be performed, we have a system of rate regulation, make sure the funds are there. If a company ever goes belly up, rather than the person bearing the harm of that, we have a guarantee association. Guarantee association's function is to pay claims in a timely manner. A recent court decision upset the expectation of how those rules will work to protect timely payment. This bill fixes it. I request your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 78, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 20, that's AB 1512. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1512 by the Committee on Insurance, enacting to insurance.
Mr. Daly, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill is a minor committee bill from the Committee on Insurance that makes a technical clarification to a bill that passed last year. That bill last year was AB 1804. The life insurers proposed an amendment late in the session last year, but floor amendments would have been difficult at that time. Instead, because last year's bill had a one-year delayed implementation date, it was agreed by all parties that the clarifying amendment would be addressed this year. AB 1512 satisfies that agreement. I respectfully request an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 79, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 21 is passed and retained. We're moving to file item 22. That's ACR 81. Clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 81 by Assemblymember David Chu and others relative to Philippine Independence Day.
Mr. David Chu, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. ACR 81, which commemorated Philippine Independence Day, is back for concurrence after amendments that we took in the Senate to add bipartisan co-authors. Respectfully ask for your support for concurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Without objection, we may take a voice vote on the item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Senate amendments are concurred in. Members, we are going to move briefly back to guest introductions. Mr. Gray, right there. There you go. Mr. Gray, you are recognized for your guest introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the UC Merced Management and Business Economics class, along with their professor, Mark Harris. Colleagues, please join me in welcoming them to the California State Assembly.
Members, we are going to move to Senate third reading. This is file item number 33, Senate Bill 277. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 277 by Senator Pan and others, enact relating to public health.
Ms. Gonzalez, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I present Senate Bill 277 on behalf of Senators Pan and Allen. As a mother, I understand that the decisions we make about our children's health care are deeply personal. While I respect the fundamental right to make medical decisions as a family, we must balance that with the fact that none of us has the right to endanger others. SB 277 strikes a balance between ensuring informed, thoughtful medical decisions between a family and their doctor and the rights of all of our school children to attend school without the fear of contracting a potentially fatal disease. Specifically, this bill deletes the personal belief exemption from children entering into state-sponsored child care in public and private school. It does allow children who, as of January 1st, 2016, who have a personal belief exemption on file to continue enrollment until that child enrolls the next grade span. This exempts children who are enrolled in private home-based schools or public independent study off campus. It also clarifies that children with an IEP have access to any special education program related to their IEP, regardless of immunization status. This bill still allows and actually strengthens and clarifies the medical exemption for vaccines if a doctor finds that a child, because of his or her own or family history, makes it medically inappropriate to be administered a vaccine. Nothing in this bill deletes a doctor's ability to work with a family on an alternative vaccine schedule and issue a conditional waiver under appropriate circumstances. So why now? Why is it critical that California tighten up our expectations that children are vaccinated? The effectiveness of vaccines is not only the result of an individual's direct protection, but it's also the protection afforded to an entire community and state when a sufficient percentage of people are vaccinated. For measles, as an example, that rate needs to be 95% to prevent the disease from spreading throughout a community and infecting babies too young to be immunized, children too medically fragile to be immunized, and the elderly whose immunities have been waned. This year, we saw a small snapshot of what can happen when our community or herd immunity starts to drop. We saw a measles outbreak at Disneyland spread quickly until over 134 Californians, including 15 infants too young to be immunized, were infected. Now, by all means, our state acted quickly, containing this outbreak, but it wasn't at no cost. Urgent care facilities in San Diego had to be shut down. Transportation hubs had to be closed. Schools had to quarantine children and force them to stay home to protect them. What happens next time? In a situation where 1 or 2% of overall immunity makes a difference in our overall public health, do we wait until we have a full-fledged crisis to protect our most vulnerable? Overwhelmingly, doctors will tell us that vaccines are one of the greatest health achievements in all of mankind. Scientists and researchers will tell us that vaccines are incredibly safe and effective. It's time that we take this very balanced and thoughtful step to increase vaccine rates in our schools, our communities, and our state. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Ms. Baker, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I rise in support of SB 277 and as a co-author. And I co-authored this bill because I wanted to make sure that there was a voice for parents. And there are many parents in this body and in the body across the building who are supportive of protecting their children and choice. I wanted to make sure it was a parent who'd recently been through the decision of whether or not to vaccinate her kids, who remembers what it's like to go to the doctor's office with 2 newborns, vulnerable, and at the same place where those who are ill and those who have issues are going. And I wanted to make sure it was a parent who didn't have a very straightforward experience with vaccines for her own children. Both of my kids had a vaccine story that made me, that was particularly unique. My son was allergic most of his life to egg, which is what the flu vaccine is generally produced in. And so we had to make a decision every year for the first several years of his life. Do we vaccinate him against a disease that could really make him very ill and impair his life, or do we potentially subject him to the risk of anaphylactic shock? And we had to make sure that every time we took him to a medical physician's office in a controlled environment to test to make sure that it was possible to take the flu vaccine, and still as parents ultimately make the choice whether or not to do it. And when it was time for my children to have the MMR, my daughter did have a reaction. And this is after I had visited with other parents about what they were doing and heard from well-educated parents that are perfectly capable of reading the science and understanding the issues, saying they weren't vaccinating their kids because they felt it could cause autism. And so I cross-examined the pediatrician, I studied the issue, and we made the decision to vaccinate our kids. And my daughter did have a reaction. She did have a very high temperature reaction, but she broke out in a rash. Took her to the doctor, and the doctor had to bring in a more senior doctor who had seen measles in his lifetime to say, yes, this is a reaction you can have to vaccines. So I'm a co-author of this bill as someone who did not have the straightforward experience with vaccines. And I am a fierce supporter of parent choice in this decision. But I also believe with choice comes personal responsibility. If you have an effect on other people in your community, you need to take responsibility for that, even if you'd really rather not, and if the consequences are not what you would choose. Because we should fight for the liberty not just of those who want not to vaccinate their kids, but those who can't. Those who are most vulnerable in our communities, whether it's the newborn infants, the immunosuppressed, the elderly, who are all throughout our communities. Every one of us represents them. And this bill, to me, is the right balance for that population as well as parent choice. And this is a bill that has parent choice. You know, I hear from so many colleagues and others, I support vaccines, but not mandates. I don't like mandates. Find for me in this bill the mandate. Every single parent in California under this bill has the right to go to their pediatrician and get the information and make a choice not to vaccinate. But that choice comes with personal responsibility. And it's just for 10 specific vaccines, 10 specific diseases, and anything else that might be added to the vaccine list, current law, which so many who oppose this bill say works very well, still applies. You can still get the personal belief exemption. And it's important to remember this isn't just about the case in Disneyland, which, by the way, I think is enough of a reason to vote yes. This is also about the situation that happened just this spring in my district with a resident of Lafayette who had the measles and got on BART, our Bay Area Rapid Transit, that goes throughout the Bay Area, 4 days during the rush hour commute, undiagnosed with measles. It's also about the student at UC Berkeley who rode on BART for 3 days during rush hour into San Francisco, a system that connects to airports all around our state and has people who have all types of health conditions on it, unaware that he has carrying the measles. It's also about my daughter who went to Girl Scout camp Memorial Day weekend just a few weeks ago. Hundreds of girls and adults who are from all throughout the Bay Area, And when she got back, instead of getting the email, hey, thanks for coming to camp, we got an email saying there was whooping cough from an unvaccinated child at the camp. And so this isn't just about Disneyland.
30 seconds.
And this isn't just about the need to make sure we wait for a crisis. I hear that from some of my colleagues. There isn't a problem right now, so we should wait for a crisis. Colleagues, do you hear how unreasonable that argument is? That if we wait for a crisis in public health with contagious diseases, that's what we should be doing? We've heard loud and clear from our constituents on this. I'm hearing loud and clear from them, including those who are the most vulnerable. And I urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Mr. Gatto, you are recognized.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've heard some reasons to vote for this bill, and there are reasons for every governmental decision, but hopefully some of you are wondering whether the bill before us is constitutional. The proponents will assure you that it is, citing a 100-year-old precedent that has to do with a city mandating a vaccine during a specific outbreak in that city. What they don't tell you is that same case, although never explicitly struck down, has been soundly repudiated. First, that opinion was written before our courts recognize the concept of substantive due process, which means simply that certain civil rights are so fundamental that government action cannot substitute its perceived wisdom to take them away. But the main reason why that opinion has been repudiated is because of what it came to stand for. You see, when that opinion was perceived as good precedent, courts relied on it to justify myriad state invasions into human bodies, including things like forced sterilization, also in the name of medical or common good. In the name of common good and protecting others and stopping an outbreak, could the state metaphorically invade our bedrooms and mandate that everybody have protected sex so that an STD epidemic does not spread? I don't think so. We, the legislature, are tasked with drawing lines. And if anyone can tell me where the line of medical necessity reasonably ends to justify a law, then I will vote for this bill. But until then, it's a slippery slope and I must rise in opposition. Analyzing the bill's constitutionality does not end with the deficiencies in old precedent. The core question here is whether the state can tell parents what medicines to put in a child's body. The general guidance comes from Troxville versus Granville, a Supreme Court opinion from the year 2000. And there the court wrote that the liberty interest at issue of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children is perhaps the oldest of fundamental liberty interests recognized. They said it is cardinal that the custody, care, and nurture of the child reside in the parents, whose freedoms include obligations that the state can neither supply nor hinder. They wrote, it cannot be doubted that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the fundamental right of parents to make decisions concerning the care, custody, and control of their children. Now, the proponents are correct when they state that other people's rights are also at stake. In California, all kids have a right to attend public school. And there are certainly kids who cannot be vaccinated because they have a serious illness or cancer. And they have a right to attend school with as much safety as the state can reasonably provide. The thought goes kids who are unvaccinated may spread disease, and that could affect safety at school. So there's a tension here, admittedly. But the overwhelming majority of kids are fully vaccinated. And so when it comes to weighing constitutional rights, a court would treat this as essentially a battle of constitutional rights between the small percentage of kids who cannot get vaccinated because they suffer from a grave condition versus the small percentage of kids who do not want to get vaccinated because it could cause a grave condition. So how would a court arbitrate these rights? It would inquire into the logic of the law. Does it accomplish its ends, and is it narrowly tailored to do so without affecting too many people's rights? Here, it's hard to argue that this bill is narrowly tailored when it requires vaccinating 5-year-olds for an STD, when it requires all kids to get a vaccination that was just 19% effective last year, and when bureaucrats can augment the list whenever they want. The broadness of this bill likely also dooms it from a constitutional standpoint. And think a little deeper and a little more critically for a moment. Here, those same unvaccinated kids who would be forced to homeschool, they're still free to play football with other kids, to mingle with them at church, at parks, to go to Disneyland. Adults are still free to go unvaccinated. So this is why some people, perhaps inarticulately to be sure, have expressed that unless there is some kind of law enforcement mechanism to check everyone's vaccination status and to isolate people, then the law is constitutionally unworkable. After all, those who are at risk of contracting disease can still be exposed by riding on an airplane or going to the doctor. Therefore, the state choosing to infringe on the right of certain students to attend school simply does not make sense. Now, the constitutional infirmities are all you need to vote no, but let's transition to a question that I purposely cover second, and that is whether science today can be sure that science tomorrow will not wonder why it was so unenlightened. This concept dates back to the time of Galileo, and when dealing with something as precious as a fundamental right, It requires us to be mindful of the equally ancient concept of hubris. The United Kingdom had a swine flu outbreak in 2009, and they don't have a constitution like ours, so their solution was simple. 6 million people were vaccinated in a program that was called unprecedented for its scale and speed.
30 seconds, Mr.
Well, it turns out that for 1 in 50,000, that vaccine causes the immune system to attack entire clusters of neurons in your brain. For people genetically disposed, that vaccine actually triggers your own brain to give you a partial lobotomy. The best scientists in the UK studied this for 6 years, and just last Sunday, the British government officially acknowledged that it is true, and they expect to be paying hundreds of people $1.5 million each. That sum is not sufficient compensation for the teenage girl who falls asleep now 40 times a day and is often awake. She's in a near cataplexic state. Taking an exam takes her 5 hours. She slurs her speech so much that the police stop her and think that she's drunk.
It's time, Mr. Gatto.
Vaccines are safe for millions, but there are those among us who are genetically a little different, and they might be affected in profound ways. Some of us might disagree with those who make non-normative medical decisions. Some of us might disagree with the opposition's lobbying tactics. Some might call parents names. Some might even call them eccentric, but that does not change the constitutionality of this bill. In fact, in circumstances like this, when considering unpopular opinions, we are on the hook for more vigilance.
Thank you, Mr. Gatto. Ms. Kim, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After a lot of thoughtful consideration, I rise in support of SB 277. I understand the opposition's arguments and appreciate their position, but at the end of the day, I cannot vote against the bill that would protect the public and our children. Personal belief exemptions against safe, effective vaccines put our infants, schools, and communities at risk. Vaccines won't be effective if we don't have high rates of participation. Not only would this have a chilling effect on California, but it would also undermine the global efforts to safeguard adults and children from disease. As many of you, I am also a proud member of Rotary International, which is an organization that has played a key role in bringing the world closer than ever to the full eradication of polio. The point has already been made about the recent measles outbreak, which happened in my district, and more pertussis cases popping up around the state. Whether or not these incidents are on a large scale, small scale, doesn't matter. These epidemics shouldn't be happening at all. I'm gravely concerned while exposing vulnerable populations to infection, like those that cannot get vaccines because of their health circumstances. This is an issue that is very close to home. My own daughter, she had a long struggle fighting a brain tumor. During her health battles, those with personal belief exemption could have exposed her to potentially deadly or debilitating viruses. I cannot imagine sending our kids to school or daycare and exposing them to a growing risk that is preventable. I appreciate all the work that my colleagues have put in the committee process, and I want to thank the author for accommodating amendments and his willingness to improve this bill. And we need to make decisions based on logic and sound data. This bill does that. For all these reasons, I'm able to support SB 277 today. Thank you.
Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of SB 277. Members, as many of you know, the Assembly Health Committee had an unprecedented debate on this bill. We had a 5-hour hearing, which included nearly an hour of testimony from expert witnesses on both sides of the debate. Witnesses addressed the impacts on health and also addressed educational and legal implications of the bill. I'm confident that the bill came out of Health Committee stronger, thanks to the careful consideration and work of my colleagues. Amendments to the bill included clarifying the exemption provided to independent study students, clarifying the rights of special education students to access special education services related to a student's individualized education program, clarifying that a medical exemption is entirely within the professional judgment of a physician and that a physician may consider family medical history when deciding if a medical exemption is appropriate. Colleagues, while this bill has drawn a robust debate and discussion this year, it certainly is not a new topic for consideration. The issue of requiring vaccines is one of the oldest public health issues taken on by this legislature, beginning with legislation mandating smallpox vaccinations in 1889, over 130 years ago. This bill, in my view, strikes an appropriate balance between protecting our community at large, protecting a child's right to an education, and protecting medically vulnerable children. Colleagues, I urge you, I vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bonta. Mr. Mathis, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman and members, first off, I would like to thank my esteemed colleague from LA for his remarks. I too rise in opposition of this bill, not because of vaccines. My children are vaccinated, I'm vaccinated, our dogs are vaccinated. Members, I oppose SB 277 because we do not have the right, nor should we have the power to take away a parent's rights to choose what to put into their children. Neither should we interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. SB 277 takes away the parent's right to choose, and it places it in the state's hands and takes away that relationship between the parents and the doctors and puts it into the hands of the state and a corporation. And to me, that is just wrong. We have SB 2109 that started, it's working, vaccines have gone up 20%. There's not a need for this bill. Members, we cannot legislate away risk. Murphy's Law will always exist. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And we cannot sit here and try to assume that we have the power to step into people's homes, step into people's lives, and make a choice for them. It's very clear that there will be something else. And we do not have the power in this body, nor the right to step in and take that away from parents. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mathis. Ms. Lopez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to express my concern with this bill. I would like to thank you, doctors, for taking the time and meet with me and discuss the concern that I have for my district. For me, this is a hard decision on this bill, but I look at both sides. I hear both sides. And I'm going to be outside for my constituents in my district. I'm not against vaccination, but I do not agree with this bill because this is not state mandated to deal with these issues, the family issues. They cannot, how are we going to help the families? They cannot have the kids in homeschooling. I don't see any planning there. Nor independent study program. I not agree with this bill because of lack of plan for those students outside the truancy violations to ensure that every child get an education, vaccinated or not. I rise today to be the voice of those parents who feel that this bill will limit the equally access in traditional hearing environment for their children. And for those reasons, I'm not supporting this bill, and I am a mother of 4. Thank you.